we have to get to the latest thing, and we'll start right now heading into the transfer portal. That's what our first segment's going to be on. Storm Duck goes into the transfer portal. We haven't talked about this yet since it happened. I believe it was last Friday that Blue White Illustrated broke the news. Your initial thoughts on Storm Duck being here for one semester?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Certainly not what any of us expected, T. Frank. I think that's safe to say. But look, I mean, guys go into the portal for a reason. It's because they're looking for more playing time at a bigger school. Maybe it's NIL related, maybe it's not. But often it's related to what is the biggest stage I can play on, number one. And then number two, how much on that stage am I going to get to play? And I think Storm Duck leaving, and look, he was widely praised within this program for the time he got to Penn State until now when he's leaving. And then something tells me that, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong on this, but Penn State might have still some nice things to say, even though I'm sure it wanted him a part of its room this year in 2023. But, you know, I think it says a lot about where Penn State's cornerback depth is. If he didn't feel like he was going to play enough here, what does that tell you about Kalen King, about Johnny Dixon, about Cam Miller and Daquan Hardy, and even maybe some of the freshmen who have come on, Elliot Washington, Zion Tracy? You've heard Sean and Ryan talk about them a good bit, and Nate as well, of course. So, you know, I think it says a lot about this room. Penn State fans should feel very good about this cornerbacks room, even though it's down an all ACC second team pick, who many people were excited about when he got here. But to me, you know, if he feels like he wasn't going to play enough, then he's going to have to go find somewhere else. I'm just not sure what stage he's going to get to play on compared to the one he came to in the first place, which was a top 10 school, obviously, in most every projection that's out there, statistical models, media picks, or otherwise. So, you know, I think it says a lot of, again, being a little bit repetitive here, but I don't really know what else the takeaway should be. I think that it says so much about the strength of this room that he felt like he was in a place coming out of spring where he was going to get the snaps that he wanted.
I'll take a different angle. I think this is a mistake for Storm. I don't know. You know, we weren't there for every single practice. I don't know how the rep count was going, but at the same time, if you want to play, they play three corners. They're not ambiguous about that. And maybe it's not Kalen King and Johnny Dixon like last year where they're rotating who the starter is, but they absolutely want that third corner to be a part of the conversation. And as we saw last year, injuries absolutely happen. So maybe it was a bit tough for a guy who's been like a 3-year starter to swallow that he wouldn't be the starter. But that's what he signed on for.
That's the room he came into, right? There was no secret about that. You talk about no ambiguity. There was no ambiguity about what he was coming into, that Penn State had a preseason All-American coming back and a guy in Johnny Dixon that they feel very good about. So, you know, to me, I just think that obviously he was a guy who played a ton at North Carolina. And to your point, he would have played a good bit here. But if he didn't feel like he was going to play enough, I guess I get moving on. But, you know, at some point you got to pick your spot and go with it, or you're not going to have anywhere to play in the fall. So, you know, to miss spring practice elsewhere, obviously is another challenge he'll have to overcome when he moves on to the new school as well.
That's to me, and that's kind of the calculation here, is it's a big gamble. He's got to find a place where he fits, that will accentuate what he's good at, and that he can start and will be on a large enough platform that he can get to the league. That's what this whole thing has been about, right? Is this last season, how does he put enough tape out there and prove that he is a draftable cornerback? And everyone wants to be in the top 64 picks, right? So everyone wants to go and play well and be a second or first round pick and then go to the NFL that way. And when your back's up against the wall here, I'm concerned. Like, this is not me trying to say that he's like, you know, this is no gloating here. Like, I'm concerned for Storm Duck. I never met him, but a guy in this situation who obviously is good at football, obviously wants to go to the next level. This is a pickle for him. So hopefully he finds a good situation and he does get what he's looking for. But I think as far as positions where he could have had an opportunity to shine, Penn State's their system, press man coverage, like, if you can hang in it, you can make a lot of plays. You saw what all these corners did last year. So from Penn State's perspective, are you concerned about the depth? I know you wrote about this at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. We both kind of wrote about this in our own ways. So are you concerned now that Penn State only has 2 proven corners and then a lot of young depth behind them?
No, I'm not, because Cam Miller is a young guy who obviously didn't play as much last year as some of his teammates did. But when you talk about spring and summer breakout picks, T. Frank, he's almost at the top of the list, if not one of the clear-cut guys in my mind. I think he has so much talent. They have talked so highly about him since he got here. The fact he was able to burn his red shirt last year, I think, speaks volume. I mean, look, do you feel great when a guy like Storm Duck leaves? No. And the reason for that is very simple. Why did they bring him here in the first place? They wanted another veteran corner. What do they now have? Not another veteran corner. So, I think you have to keep that in mind as well, is that when Penn State's out looking to fill needs, obviously it thinks that it has a situation that it needs to grab a hold of and try and fix. And I think it did that initially with corner and Storm Duck in terms of getting another veteran guy in there. But am I worried about the depth? No. And I think the other thing I would say along those lines is that we've heard good things this year, T. Frank, about the situation at corner when it comes to the freshmen, the January enrollees. Elliot Washington's received praise. If you're watching on YouTube, you're looking at that right now. Lamont Payne's in that room, of course. And Zion Tracy as well. So, those guys are going to have to add some weight. But Terry Smith said, speaking specifically about Tracy and Washington on after one of Penn State's spring practice, that those guys are going to make the travel squad, and it would just be a matter of how much they would play, be it on special teams. Can they save 4 games? Do injuries cause something, etc.? I think that's probably out the window right now for one of them, unless they're going to divert from what they've done since really Terry Smith has been here through Brent Pry and now with Manny Diaz, and that's rotate a lot of corners. So if one of those guys is game ready, you can start writing the which Penn State players burned their red shirt stories that we'll write all fall long now. Because one of those guys is certainly going to be a part of the rotation if they're ready. Could Penn State find a corner in the portal at this juncture and bring somebody else in? Maybe. I guess we'll see. Keep in mind that portal window closes soon, but graduate transfers can go into it anytime. There are still teams that have not finished spring yet. There are a bunch of spring games this weekend, not a ton, but enough that you're going to get another blast of portal entries Sunday and Monday. So there certainly is time for Penn State to attack things at numerous positions. Whether they want to do that at cornerback, we'll have to wait and see. But, obviously, again, I think that, am I worried about the depth? No, but I think it is a caveat, it must be mentioned, that they brought him here for a reason, and that was to fill a specific role that he'll no longer be filling.
I do actually have a concern about the depth because injuries we've seen each year over the last couple of years, injuries have hit the cornerback position. They've hit every position. So you have 2 of the better starters in the Big Ten. We're going to get to some stuff about Kalen King a little bit later in the show, but you can't get better than Kalen King coming back, like in America. He's one of the best returning corners in America. You're still not starting from a bad position. But if we're talking about this team in terms of making a run at a Big Ten championship and beyond, obviously all the other caveats that we don't have to talk about, but the one we'll focus on here is reliable depth. Good teams, they have answers at every position, and they have reliable depth for things that happen. Cam Miller is young. He's going to make some mistakes. He's going to, even if he is very good, Kalen King made mistakes early in his career, but physically or mentally. That's going to happen. Without that buffer of Storm Duck on the roster, you have King, Dixon, and now Miller's elevated into that third cornerback role pretty clearly. Zion Tracy we did not see him participate a lot in the spring, if at all. Elliot Washington, a true freshman. Lamont Payne, a true freshman. And then it's a bunch of guys that are run-ons. The one caveat here, I'd say, is Daquan Hardy. You have a veteran player who has been basically just a slot corner over the last couple of years, especially with Manny Diaz. But they have they have played him on the outside. So can he provide you some of that veteran depth on the outside? Does this open the door for him to do a little bit more? That, I think, is the one area I'd say that is a saving grace in terms of depth, that they have 3 guys that I think look really good. And just as a side note, I thought Daquan Hardy, the limited role we saw, looked really good in the spring. He finally looked confident again in Manny Diaz's defense. So I do think it's an issue, and I don't think they're going to be able to solve it because, it's not free agency like we've talked about, because it's not you can't just go and get a guy like Storm Duck to come in and play and be a reserve player on the roster because they want to go start. Like, that's the difference between here and the NFL, is like being a backup. It's fine in the NFL. Xander says Storm leaving is great for the young corners. That is one area where I will say, do you think the development, say by game 4, this is kind of on the back burner? That the youthful part of this is they'll kind of progress pretty quickly because they are forced into the role. Do you think that's a fair way to look at it too?
Yeah. So what does Terry Smith always say, T. Frank? And I apologize. I'm not paying. I'm not looking at the camera for watching. I'm trying to find a quote here from Terry Smith to make sure I didn't misquote him a second ago. But I'll do that here in a second. But what does James Franklin always say? And it's very simple. It's that when you are at a point, whether it's week 4, week 6, week 8, what have you, when Penn State thinks you're ready to play, and hopefully my barking dog's not coming through, but when Penn State thinks you're ready to play, and you get those first few games under your belt, you're no longer a freshman. So that is a step that these guys are going to have to make. And like I said a few moments ago, there are guys on this roster that are going to have an expanded role at cornerback. There's just no two ways around it this year. Penn State's going to need those guys to be ready to go. And that's something that, again, they're going to have to train for under Terry Smith, under Manny Diaz, and try and get ready to go as fast as they can. I do want to correct that because I said Zion Tracy on the travel squad, but you're right. It's Elliot Washington and Lamont Payne. So let me just fix that mistake I made a few moments ago. But yeah, those two guys, if Penn State brings you in, they think you're a player, and that's obvious. And the further you are away from the ball, the more likely you are to get on the field sooner. We have seen that. Cam Miller is living proof of that last season. So at least one of those guys are going to have to be ready to fill that role. And is it a non-conversation by game 4? We'll just have to wait and see. You talk about young guy mistakes. You also talk about how many reps does Penn State want to play Kalen King and Johnny Dixon? Do they play them more snaps than they usually do their top 2 corners? That's another conversation they're going to have. And then I think you make a great point with Daquan Hardy. He's a guy that I thought had a very up and down year last year, but to your point, he did look more confident in the spring. They're going to need him to be. They're going to need him to play like a veteran guy. And then the other thing I would say, I don't think this comes into play, but when you talk about injuries, one of the things we always talk about along the offensive line is versatility. Can you play guard? Can you play tackle? Can you play left? Can you play right? Let's not forget Penn State's moved some cornerbacks to safety. Now, there's a reason for that. They think they're better safeties, and also they needed numbers in that room. But it's not like you have a bunch of guys playing safety who have never played cornerback before. As an adjustment, no question about it. You also have Christian Driver, who I don't think Penn State's going to revert him back to the defensive side of the ball. He made pretty clear he wants to play offense. They made pretty clear that was their stance. But if you got into an absolute horrible pinch, it's not like this guy didn't suit up in the Rose Bowl. So I think that that's something to keep in mind too. You have some options here to move guys around. I'm not sure it's moves they would want to make, but let's be honest. What reactionary moves to injuries does any college football team want to make? Clearly, they have a set plan for a reason positionally, but I think that's important to keep in mind as well. There are some options at other positions on the roster should the injury bug bite bad, or should you get some kind of crazy situation with targeting or ejections or things like that.
Like this video if you're watching right now, subscribe to Blue White Illustrated here on YouTube, and of course, if you don't mind, subscribe to bluewhiteillustrated.com and here on the YouTube channel.